And for all of these reasons, I am really honored to be a recipient of the Fulbright Prize, and it means a great deal to me. My doctoral thesis identifies two main ways in which race, space, and emotion are interlinked in 21st century African-American literature. And so the first thread that emerges is the negative impact of racial and geographic forms of oppression on emotions. So I read white supremacist geographies, including plantation geographies, Jim Crow geographies, as well as geographies of environmental injustice, as sites of emotional oppression and violence. So these white racial geographies, they unevenly and unjustly subject Black individuals to emotional violence by, for example, producing highly alerting experiences of fear, by producing debilitating experiences of shame, as well as disturbing and disrupting really enduring experiences of grief. And just as importantly, I identify a second thread that runs through the novels of contemporary African-American novelists, which is this sort of two-way relationship between Black geographies and emotional healing and liberation. I consider how more open and inclusive world building and community building and place-making practices can actually help to open up possibilities for unmaking personal and collective pain and trauma. And I simultaneously read emotions as catalysts for the creation of more liberating, of more socially just geographies. There are a lot of privileges that the dominant link between race and space confers to whiteness. But the narratives that I consider, they show time and again that participating in the subjugation of others and profiting from it also has emotional consequences for white individuals. So there is this character of Clara Martin in Edward P. Jones's The Known World, who is a white woman living during the time of slavery, and she falls in love with an enslaved Black character who is essentially her slave. And she denies the existence of her romantic feelings, even to herself, because she is so afraid of veering from the path that racial, gendered, and class norms prescribe for her. And also, she's afraid of losing the privileges afforded to her. And so this means that this fear kind of forecloses possibilities for emotional connection, for emotional expression, and ultimately emotional freedom. The research that I did in my doctoral thesis is connected to and inspired by the research that I did on a larger project, namely the Narrative Encounters with Ethnic American Literatures project that was funded by the Austrian Science Fund and led by Professor Alexa Mosna at the Department of English at the University of Klagenfurt. And the central goal of this project sort of was to develop a cognitive approach that enables us to better understand the role of emotion and empathy in a wide range of ethnic American texts, including and especially texts by African American writers, by Mexican American writers, and Muslim American writers. What inspired and motivated me to conduct research in this interdisciplinary area of studies really was my work with Professor Alexa Mosna, whose scholarship was absolutely foundational for creating a sort of conversation between African American studies and cognitive approaches to narrative emotion. And I think that this conversation is enriching in both ways. So it is mutually enriching. On the one hand, cognitive approaches can help us to better understand the role of emotion and empathy, how emotion and empathy operate in African American literary texts. And they can also provide us the toolkits for analyzing how these texts narrate the elicitation, the experience, the expression, and the response to emotions through both content and through narrative form. And on the other hand, African American studies can help cognitive narratology to sort of develop a more contextualized version of cognitive narratology by pushing it to integrate more fully the social and political context in which emotions are produced, in which they are embedded. And they can also push it to not only consider emotions in individualistic terms, but to also incorporate the collective and decidedly communal ways in which Black individuals and communities, and also other non-white communities, respond to and understand emotions. And what I hope to do with my doctoral thesis and the book that is hopefully going to come out of it is to further contribute to and develop this dialogue. I think that the radical potential of the Black imagination hinges on its liberatory potential for envisioning more expansive, more communal, more relational ways of being in the world for Black people and for everyone else. And also its potential to push back against rigid boundaries, against essentialist divisions on the basis of identity markers such as race, but also class, gender, and sexuality. And such ways of making place and occupying place can generate inclusion and belonging, and they can foster emotional liberation and emotional healing. There is this sort of focus on community that is very central to Black placemaking, and this prompts us to recognize our interconnectedness, and it by extension prompts us to rethink and reimagine the ways we relate to each other. I think we're living in a time of unprecedented African American literary production. So this means that there is a wealth of narratives out there. But I do want to zoom in on a few of the novels that were or are central to my doctoral thesis. The first one is Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad, which is a neo-slave narrative. That is to say, a contemporary novel that takes us back to the period of American racial slavery. And I chose this book because of the ways in which it interrogates the complexities of both fear and hope in relation to race and geography. So on the one hand, a negative emotion, on the other hand, a positive emotion. So The Underground Railroad invites readers to empathically engage with the Black female protagonist's experiences of fear that centrally shape her story of enslavement and also her subsequent story as a runaway. But Whitehead at the same time shows that these historic and ongoing forms of white violence have by no means entirely foreclosed Black hope. And it does that by portraying the various ways in which Black characters practice hope in and through place and during and after slavery. And so one important lesson that Whitehead's 21st century readers can take away from engaging with the 19th century protagonist and story world is understanding how forms of fear and hope that are produced by and embedded in contemporary social and political contexts carry with them actually the racial and spatial logics of the past. And I think Whitehead, like many African American novelists, returns to the past to tell us something more about the present. Another novel that is central to my thesis is Toni Morrison's Home, which is a neo-segregation narrative. That is to say, a contemporary narrative that takes us back to the time of Jim Crow segregation. And the novel follows Black War veteran Frank Money, who navigates the Jim Crow geographies of the 1950s. After returning from the Korean War, the protagonist struggles with complicated feelings of shame that are in part produced by his experience of being denigrated by the same country for which he fought. So on the one hand, Morrison exposes and critiques the pain of shame that is produced by essentialists in and out of divisions. And on the other hand, she unearths the radical, everyday potential of her characters, who create spaces that are free from any shame that is brought on by identity categories such as race as well as gender. And I would also like to briefly introduce another novel, Maurice Carlos Ruffin's We Cast a Shadow, which is a satire that directs its ethical critique at the ways in which Black anger is objectified and incapacitated in white geographies, while also providing readers with a deeper understanding of anger in relation to race, geography, and power. The protagonist in Ruffin's near future story world rejects anger, and more specifically, outrage against injustice altogether. And he does that because he had to learn at a very young age that expressing anger as a Black male subject is not only socially impermissible, but that it can also be very dangerous. But more importantly, the novel wants us to see and to critique the society that produced the protagonist and his emotions and his actions. It ultimately directs its moral outrage at a world which objectifies, dismisses, rejects, and fears Black expressions of anger. My own ethnic background, growing up as part of a migrant family in Austria, informed my work in the sense that I certainly recognized fragments of my own experience as woven into the stories that I analyzed. My lived experience taught me that and how emotions such as fear and hope, anger and shame are connected to both identity and social status. I'm obviously neither American nor Black, and these specificities matter, which is why I also want to emphasize that we should be careful not to draw simplified equivalences between different contexts and experiences of marginalization. But I do also believe that emotions in this sense are a particularly intriguing object of study because they offer us templates for thinking through the commonalities and linkages between the experiences of minoritized individuals across times, across places, across social, political, and cultural contexts. As I was reading for shame in African American literature, for instance, I learned a great deal about shame as a political tool that is used to quite literally keep minoritized individuals and groups in their place, to keep them paralyzed, to keep them silent, to make them afraid from speaking up, and to also, in that sense, incapacitate their hopes. Growing up, I did not have a conceptual or mental category for this. I felt shame in various ways and contexts because my family lived differently, behaved and spoke differently, ate different foods. What I did not understand is how political that shame was, that it had nothing to do with us or me being worth less, but that it had everything to do with parochial social norms that cast difference as strangeness. And this is precisely why I believe it is so important to actually speak about and address the ways in which the personal is political and the ways in which emotions are enmeshed with unequal power relations. Because it can help us, or it can help minoritized individuals in Austria, in the United States, or anywhere else to better understand and cope with their own experiences of marginalization that are produced by various and often intersecting forms of social inequality and injustice. I am very grateful that my doctoral thesis was selected for this year's Fulbright Prize. Fulbright has been doing a fantastic and critical work for so long in fostering the exchange of students, of scholars, of teachers between Austria and the United States, in fostering education, knowledge, cooperation, understanding, and also really empathetic relations. And I think that this work is now more important than ever. And for all of these reasons, I am really honored to be a recipient of the Fulbright Prize, and it means a great deal to me.